So I want to start off by introducing myself. So my name is Jess. I am a physicist who works at Imperial. I was just thinking after Chris's fantastic talk yesterday, Imperial really should have sponsored this conference, given that we're both here. So maybe you can ask for that for next year. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about who I am and the public engagement and outreach I've done, and other things that I've learned about academia that I think would have been useful to know when I was kind of exactly in the same situation as you doing my PhD a few years ago. I want to start by saying thank you, especially to Cara, Chris and Rose for organising this fantastic conference and for giving you all an opportunity to share your research and share your plans for research and everything that we're going to do post-lockdown. And also to Sam Giles, here is her Twitter handle, if you don't already follow her, for letting me send her my slides and telling me they weren't terrible. So thank you to Sam, and apologies for the title because I know that you didn't like it. So I'm going to start off by introducing who I am, because I realized that even though that long, lengthy, embarrassing introduction may have given you a little insight, you don't know that much about me. So I work at Imperial College. I work primarily in the physics department, but with a whole bunch of chemists. We take new materials. Here's a little example of some new materials, usually in kind of milligram quantities, if you're interested in the kind of materials we work with. The chemists do this fantastic, marvelous kind of magical synthesis. I then turn these into semiconducting solutions. So I dissolve these materials into common organic solvents, and I print them into these really, really beautiful crystal structures. And then ultimately what I'm trying to do is to put those into electronic devices. And as perfectly mentioned in the introduction, what the electronic devices that I'm trying to create emit circularly polarized light. So we twist the light that comes out of the pixels of your mobile phone or television. And super happy to talk about that at length whenever anyone wants to hear it. Beyond that, I'm really, really interested in initiatives that promote and campaign for equality, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Huge fan of Wikipedia. I'm really, really into sunrises, so wherever I am, I try and go and see sunrise, which has been quite sad this year because we've not been able to travel that much, so I've seen exactly the same sunrise a whole bunch of times. I'm also really into art, and it's something that's been really, really important to me throughout my degree and now my research, to maintain this interest and kind of have that opportunity to let your mind think creatively about something that isn't science. And I know all of you will have those interests too. And it's just been something that's been super important to me. I like cycling, inside or outside cycling, and again, sport and keeping in some kind of movement and being able to go outside has kind of kept me sane throughout lockdown. I also like having my nails painted with cool scientific things. So this one on the top was for a photonics conference last year. And you can see it's a cool little prism, which I loved because not only did my nails look awesome, but I got to teach the nail painter about refraction and reflection and different aspects of light. And then here's one with the Wikipedia logo. And also I think something that has been massively important to me as a scientist and as an early career researcher like all of you is getting a team of scientists who I feel comfortable around and comfortable talking to about really difficult issues. And certainly Professor Chris Jackson is one of them, but so are so many other scientists. So finding that network of allies, that network of people, Mike Sulu, Sam Giles, Ben Britton, Chris Jackson, who you can turn to for advice and insight has been really, really important to me. Final fact about the materials I work with, because it's just so fascinating. I want you to remember it later when you're in a virtual pub. So I work with materials that are chiral, and that means that they exist as non-superimposable left and right-handed pairs. The coolest chiral fact I can tell you is that the trunks, the barks of wisteria are chiral, so they're twisted. You can kind of see it in their structure here. And this is cool because it connects to the natural world, which is what you guys will love. You can see they're twisted. You can see that they rotate in a particular direction. And actually what we know now from studying them is that Japanese wisteria all twist clockwise and Chinese wisteria all twist anti-clockwise. So their barks of these plants twist in one direction in the other direction, which is so cool. Okay, back to talking about everything else I was going to tell you. So I thought I'd kind of give a general overview to equity and access in academia, although lots of this was mentioned super eloquently by Chris yesterday. then talk a little bit about science communication and social media and the work that I've done, and kind of finish with things that I really wish that I had known when I started out doing my PhD. I should give a positionality statement. I saw Sam doing a talk a couple of weeks ago and she did this and I thought it was fantastic. So whilst I am a woman working in a physics department and women are very, very underrepresented in physics departments, I'm also privileged in a whole bunch of different ways. And I think that I should recognize that before talking to anyone about equity and inclusion. I'm white, I'm able-bodied, I've always worked in affluent institutions. And so this is something that I guess you should know before I start speaking about this, but it's also something that's really pushed me to fight for change for others and hopefully have some impact on that front. So something that I've realized over the last couple of years, started to realize during my PhD and now realize even more, is that access to and participation in academic research isn't fair. This starts quite early, and certainly all of the women in the audience who studied physics A-level, which I know lots of you will have done for doing the PhDs that you're doing, will know this, that about 1 in 5 of physics A-level candidates are women, and this hasn't changed for an incredibly long time. About 10%, 1 in 10 of computer science A-level students are women. So we've got really big inequality starting quite early on. I guess something that's always upset and frustrated me and doesn't get more widely spoken about is that it's not only underrepresentation of girls and women in A-level subjects, but it's also incredibly classist subjects like physics. So we know that young women are 2.5 times more likely to study physics if they start off an all-girls school, and about 6% of the population get to go to single-sex schools. So we have this huge, huge inequality that starts off when you're, 14, 15, or 16. And actually, we've seen lately with the mutant algorithm that this inequality is being driven more, accelerated further than ever before. So it's not like we've got these statistics and we're acting on them. We have a government who are trying to propagate and push this inequality. Beyond gender, if we think more broadly about access to and participation in science, we know that it's completely unfair for people who are LGBTQ+. There was a fantastic report by APS, the American Physical Society, a couple of years ago, looking at the climate in physics for LGBTQ+ scientists. They found that about 40%, so 4 in 10 scientists who were LGBTQ+ weren't out at work. So they didn't feel comfortable talking to their colleagues about who they were. The Royal Society of Chemistry and Institute of Physics have come together to do a more recent report, but found similar things. So I would really urge you to go and look at these reports and read them. And I'm happy to send everyone these slides later and put the links in so that you can all see them. This is particularly important, I think, in earth sciences. And there's been lots of blogs and discussions about this recently. So in the work that you all do, in those fantastic presentations where you go out and collect cores and go and do all these amazing things that we don't get to do as humble materials physicists, you've really got to think about where you're going. And some countries, certain places aren't safe for people who are out and LGBTQ+. And I think these discussions are starting to happen, but they're not really happening fast enough. And certainly something that we should all be aware of as researchers is how we need to keep talking about and fighting for equality for everyone. I can't speak super long on this because I don't have enough time, but there is going to be a fantastic talk next week by one of my dear colleagues called Izzy Jayasinghe. It is on September the 10th at 9 a.m. This is Pacific time. It's run by SPIE, who is the photonics organization that I work with a whole bunch, but they're super nice. They will be completely open and inclusive to anyone who doesn't work in photonics. But if you want to come along and hear about that, it won't be specific to physics, and I think it would be really important to come to. So I will happily send details to everyone. Something that Chris mentioned yesterday was the huge inequality of people of different ethnicities in the UK, particularly in academia. We have about 21,000 professors in the UK, which is just an absolutely overwhelming number. About 17,850, so about 85% of them identify as white. We have 147 Black professors in the UK. So I wonder if you realize how lucky we were to have Chris talking yesterday. And as Chris mentioned, there's only about, I think maybe 26 now Black women professors. So we have stark inequality, not only for gender, not only for the sense of belonging the LGBTQ plus scientists feel, but also for different ethnicities. And I think that we're starting to have these discussions more loudly and more eloquently than before. There was a recent debacle on Twitter that some of you may have followed when UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, who fund most of the scientific research that all of us do, announced their huge new 4.3 million coronavirus fund. And this was to give money to 6 projects for people working on issues related to coronavirus that looked at why Black and minority ethnic people were so much more likely to contract severe forms of the disease and die from it. A fantastic woman called Adeline, a researcher, found that £0 of that 4.3 million went to Black PIs. So despite coronavirus disproportionately impacting Black communities, none of that money was going to Black researchers. And actually 3 out of 6 of the projects that were funded to a member of the deciding panel. So someone who was making the decisions about what should be funded in half of the cases got their projects funded. And I think that is pretty awful. This is Addie's Twitter, if you want to follow her. She's been speaking up and calling it out for a long time. So we have this academic system which is incredibly unfair, incredibly non-transparent, and really, really difficult to navigate if you're from an underrepresented or historically marginalized group. Addie's actually doing an event also on the 10th of September, so I'm filling up your calendars for next Thursday. But it's at 6:30 p.m. UK time, so you can catch that on Zoom. And again, I'll send you all the details for this again. I think it's super important that we have these discussions about equality and access and equity now, because what we're seeing is that the pandemic is deepening the inequality that we had before, particularly for people with caring responsibilities. So primarily the articles are focused on women, but obviously this transcends women, and anyone who's looking after elderly parents or children may have found the last couple of months particularly, well, not couple of months, right? We've been in lockdown for nearly 7 months, may have found that time particularly difficult to handle. And I think we're gonna have to think about this when we look at and try and evaluate academic career paths for years to come. So the fantastic news is it's not all doom and gloom, and there are really, really great people working to try and challenge this. And I think the exciting thing for us as early career researchers in the UK is how much of this initiative and activity is starting from here, is coming from the UK. Chris spoke about them yesterday, but there's a fantastic organization called Leading Roots who are looking at the underrepresentation of Black postgraduates and doing loads of training programs and really, really calling for government and policy to act upon this. Tigers in STEM, the Inclusion Group for Equity in STEM, are a group who you can find on Twitter and have a huge number of resources, have been running webinars throughout the summer to try and talk about diversity and access and inclusion, and actually have driven the government to do a big internal review of where scientific funding gets allocated. I could keep talking about all of these organizations for a really long time, and I don't want to overwhelm you with names. But something that I think makes me really proud as a young scientist working in this field is how many of these grassroots organizations have really, really shown a huge impact. You know, Pride in STEM has taken LGBTQ plus scientists all over the country to talk about their research in non-conventional settings. Black British professionals in STEM, BB STEM, have started a university partnership so that they'll support Black early career researchers in universities across the country. Generating Genius are just fantastic, and they're a charity who look to support. I've just said I won't talk about them all, and now I'm talking about them all, so I'm not going to. But all of these organizations are great, and they're ones that I think are really worth giving some research and time looking at. The great thing is that you can be part of these efforts too. And I think I probably realized this when I was doing my PhD. So when I was in exactly the same level as you guys, I was thinking about ways that I could give back to the science community. As I told you, I felt very, very privileged. I felt very lucky to be where I was. I was studying physics. As you heard in the introduction, I never got away from being at Imperial, but I was learning physics in a community of people who were also super excited about physics. And I'd never really had anyone tell me that I couldn't do physics or that I shouldn't do physics or I didn't look like someone who could do physics. And then I started to look around, and I started to look around kind of towards the end of my degree. So in kind of my 4th year, that MSci year. And I realized just how unequal this physics department was. I think for the first few years, the work itself was so challenging that I just put my head down and kind of treated it like school, and I'd go home and do my homework, and I wouldn't really think about it. And then in that final year, it suddenly dawned on me, you know, not only is there a huge overrepresentation of white people, but it's male dominated. We're not supporting people who really, really could have sensational careers in research scientists or in industry and whatever they want. And so I started reading up on it. I guess like everyone in this audience, I wanted to come to it scientifically. I wanted to think about the ways that we could engage with different communities in a meaningful way. You know, I'd looked at these statistics, the representation of women in A-level classes, the representation of people of color in A-level classes for physics, for chemistry, for further maths, whatever. And I was trying to think about how we have known about this inequality for decades, you know, since our parents were doing their A-levels or whatever they called them. And yet we've never really made significant progress on it. There is some really, really neat research, and I'm happy to have a conversation. Oh, look, my screen even saved the picture of screenshot. That's really useful. Thank you, Apple. I'll write to you to tell you what a great feature that is. So there's fantastic research that you can read about, and actually things that I'm happy to share and discuss, particularly for anyone in this audience who does outreach work with kids or with different, you know, communities who are accessing science for the first time. The Institute of Physics have done for about 15 years research on trying to improve gender balance in physics A-level. And they've come out with some really, really great things that, again, I'm happy to discuss offline. They've done a little bit of research. You can see here, this was from May 2006, looking at the participation of different ethnicities in chemistry and physics and what particular factors influence people's decision to stay or to choose a subject. But certainly reading these kind of things, I mean, I read so many reports when I started doing this kind of outreach and engagement work, really kind of showed you what was important and what was useful, and kind of crucially, what was not important and what was not useful. I went to an amazing thing by Teen Tech, and Teen Tech is run by Maggie Philbin, who you may remember as a television presenter. But she gave this slide, which was what kids feel when people go and stand in front of them in a classroom. You know, you probably remember it, or you've done it yourself, when you go and give a talk in a high school or in a primary school. The way that kids interpret us as scientists, what they feel about us. And this was things they really get frustrated by when we go in. I think some of these are amazingly insightful, so they don't have attractive posters. You know, the way we present what we present really impacts kids' perception of a subject and whether they think they could fit in or contribute to that discipline. They talk about themselves without advising me. They give advice to everyone, very general advice to everyone when we're all different. You know, these kind of things, attending these events, reading these reports really got me thinking about how we can do outreach and engagement in a different way. I then ran my first event, which was massively overwhelming. This was during my PhD. It was in partnership with an organization called Green Light for Girls. This is the physics department at Imperial. This is the big lecture theatre that I had all my undergraduate lectures in. Pretty gross, I know you're probably all thinking. Also very difficult to do a lecture course in at the moment. How will we fit all the students in and socially distance? This fits about 250 people. So I decided, in partnership with Green Light for Girls, I'd arrange an event. I mean, it was absolute carnage, and I can't believe I did it now. But inviting 250 schoolgirls in, I worked with the Institute of Physics to identify schools around London who didn't have specialist physics teachers. So to find schools that really, really needed science outreach. Something that really struck me when I was doing my PhD was how the schools who email you or the schools who request people to go in are usually the ones that are pretty well catered for already. They have people coming in all the time. Sometimes these fancy schools in London email you and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we've had Brian Cox and Jim Al-Khalili. Will you come and do a lunchtime talk? And I'm just like, no, you definitely don't need me then. But this time I really made an effort to find schools who didn't usually get that engagement. And the amazing thing about this, I mean, it was so tiring. I had 18 different workshops going on 3 times in the day so that we could move these girls around, going between all of the different things. and got sponsorship from all of these huge companies, which actually gave me a lot more confidence for writing grants and things like that afterwards. The incredible thing about this was in 2015, and now these girls are just going or just beginning to either apply for or start university, and I get emails from them being like, I've just started chemistry at Manchester, I've just started it. So these kind of phenomenal things keep, especially if you keep your email address, I suppose. I then got really into this kind of buzz of arranging things and putting on events. I had a big 2-day, so that was a big commitment, engineering themed hackathon, where I had girls who were kind of 15, 16 come together. I had it sponsored by the Royal Academy of Engineering, so I applied for quite a serious grant to be able to fund this. And I partnered with some computer science graduates from Imperial who run something called the Turing Lab, where they teach young people how to code. And what we did was collect a few data sets, and I'm happy to share this idea with anyone because I think it was really great and it came from all of the discussions that we had together. But we got kind of data sets relating to the climate and the environment and where people were, and gave them to these young girls and then taught them some basic programming skills so that they could create some kind of game or app that would translate those data sets into something visual that people could interact with. And we had a kind of introduction and an icebreaker, and all of them hung out. It was about 60, so that it was a manageable number. They then spent the day creating and working on their projects. On the second day, I had all of their parents come in so that they could hear about academic careers and also the different ways that you apply for university and what really university was. And then the girls presented to their parents, which is kind of like, you know, you all remember presenting to your parents. It was quite an exciting and overwhelming thing to do. So we had this amazing dynamic event that was not only educational and learning, related to things that have kind of social justice roots. You know, young people, particularly young people, I think, from marginalized groups, are really motivated by things that push for social change. So doing something related to the climate, doing something related to, we had kind of early monitoring systems for natural disasters, those kind of things are really important to young people. And again, I'll emphasize it, thinking about public engagement and science communication and applying for this money really gives you a sense that what you're doing is important, but what you're doing is kind of useful for your career. Writing these grant applications is really, really good. My friend wrote a book, and actually I think for all of you fantastic earth scientists or environment scientists, writing kids' books is a really incredible way to get into young people's homes and get into young people's minds. Something really exciting about this is my friend Sophie Dean. The book she wrote is called Detective Dot, and it's a young coder whose best friend is a drone, and they go out to try and understand the world around them, and it's all kind of linked to the computer science curriculum. The amazing thing about this book is that it's not only read by kids, but it's also read by their parents. And I think this is something kind of magical that happens with kids' books, that if you start to think about it, it's an amazing way to access two completely different age groups, two completely different communities, to talk to them about things that are important, you know, climate change, the environment, antibiotic resistance, understanding where the items that we live with come from. All of those conversations are quite hard to have with parents and children normally, but if you go in through kids' books, you get this really great introduction. So I wanted to show this picture just to remind me to talk about it, but we had a little stand at the Imperial Festival. I'm not even sure it was legal that we were allowed to be selling things there, but I just did it anyway because I break all the rules. Something that I've been doing recently a lot is every time someone asks me to go and talk somewhere, like in a different country, is to say, can I come and hang out with some school students at the same time? So this was last year, pre-pandemic, when we were allowed to not socially distance, and I was invited to give a talk at a university in Brazil, and I said, yeah, sure, but I'll only come if I can go and hang out with some of the schools nearby. And I went out and we did these Wikipedia workshops in Portuguese, in Brazilian version of Portuguese, with all of these young people, and also just spoke about science, which was just really exciting. So I think you can put that in your kind of, you know, your rider when you're invited to give a talk at a conference, that you want that to be something that you do too. Something else that was really important for me was taking part in I'm a Scientist, Get Me Out of Here. I don't know how many of you have thought about this or heard about it. It's a really fantastic, entirely online science communication competition where it runs for 2 weeks. And it's about 5 different scientists in each section, and there are different sections based on different disciplines. For the first week, you and your fellow scientists just answer the question of school kids. So school kids, like these fantastic ones here, go online and ask questions to these scientists. For the second week, they vote 1 scientist off each day. So you become progressively more competitive and your answers get longer and you start putting in diagrams and it's all you can think about. And this actually taught me the kind of power of going online, you know, long before coronavirus forced us to do it. Also doing some popular science writing. So long before I learned about the joys of Wikipedia, I started writing for things like Physics World, which is the monthly magazine of the Institute of Physics. But really that's helped me a lot, I think, in trying to articulate things without jargon in a way that's kind of exciting and interesting. Well, I hope so. Maybe someone who reads the science papers and grants I write can tell you whether that's true. But certainly getting some experience of that, if you can, beyond your PhD, beyond your technical writing, I think is really, really useful. And actually, as a result of all of these things, I've been invited to talk at the most weird and wonderful places. And I think that it has just really, really helped me as a scientist and kind of to fulfill your career afterwards, to keep pushing, to keep asking questions. It's been kind of this absolutely amazing journey. So the amazing thing, I think, kind of coming off the back of that, I'm a scientist, get me out of here, is that you don't have to leave where you are to be able to do really effective and meaningful engagement. I mean, fantastic if you can get a whole team of, how many Sherpas did Chris have going up the hill? He had about 100 and something people helping him and a BBC team and all of this videography. I'm not at that level of fame yet. So the most incredible thing that you can do is to just communicate and connect with people from where you're at. A couple of years ago now, in 2017 actually, so 3 years ago, I read this incredible book by Angela Saini called Inferior, The True Power of Women and the Science That Shows It. And in Inferior, Angela goes through, looks at history, looks at the stereotypes that we maintain as a society about women, and shows just how wrong they are and how they are based on completely biased science, run by completely biased scientists. And I think this book taught me kind of 2 things. It taught me just the huge challenges with doing scientific research neutrally. So how people approach scientific experiments influences the outcomes that they'll get, which I think I hadn't really ever considered as a physicist working with materials. You know, I was just like, hey, I just make a device and measure it. I don't really think about what's beyond it. But no, your bias impacts the science you do. And the huge impact that's had on women's progression and women's scientific careers. And it kind of gave me this voice, this kind of anger that I needed to speak up and I needed to act upon it. So about the year after I read Inferior, I took it all over the world. I gave copies to every single cool, impressive person I met. I bankrupted myself on Amazon. My mum was like, please, no more ordering Inferior. And I just kept going. And honestly, and eventually met Angela actually, and she was just like, who is this weirdo who keeps buying my books and following me around? And eventually landed on this idea that we need to do a better job of celebrating the scientists we have from marginalized backgrounds and groups. There were lots of fantastic people in Inferior who spoke up, oh gosh, what have I done? Oh no, oh my God, went to the wrong area. Sorry guys. New laptop, too excited, who spoke up, who called out inequality. Let's see if I can progress slides still, I can. Who called out inequality, who stood up for themselves and who we don't know about and we don't speak about. When Charles Darwin published The Origin of the Species or any of his other works and decided that men were superior to women intellectually, so women were intellectually inferior, but morally superior. That's what his tag was. There were women writing to him who weren't allowed to go to university, who weren't allowed to own property because this was the 1800s, saying this just isn't right. And we don't remember and we don't speak about them. There's so many examples of this. So if you look at the UK science curriculum, there's not a single woman named at all. If you look at US textbooks, there are very, very few Black women mentioned. So we have this way as a society of trying to erase people and to wipe out their contributions. The interesting thing though, I think, and you definitely had this feeling yesterday during Chris's talk, is the power of putting these role models, putting these voices in central screen, giving them the opportunity to shine and inspire others. We saw it wonderfully with Hidden Figures. So when the movie Hidden Figures came out, I don't think 21st Century Fox had expected it to be quite as formidably successful as it was. But this has inspired and excited a whole generation of young women scientists, particularly African-American young women scientists. So when we give people these icons and inspirations, when we tell these stories that have been previously silenced and not spoken about, you can really change people's perceptions of who does science. And I think this was really highlighted in Chris's example yesterday, and I'm glad he used it because I always use it when I'm talking, but the letter that he had from the teacher in Chicago about Expedition Volcano, that shows you the power of people, putting people in media that people consume. Sorry, that sentence had a lot of the word people in, but putting someone on television, putting someone on the internet, putting someone on a platform where people go to for information is a phenomenally powerful way and an important way, impactful way, long-lasting way to change perceptions of who does what. Now I get to talk about Wikipedia. So around the same time that I read Inferior, and actually the same time that Hidden Figures came out, I learned about Wikipedia. I met this incredible woman called Alice White, who works at the Wellcome Collection in London, and her job, Dr. Alice White, her job is taking content from the Wellcome and putting it on Wikipedia. So Wellcome have realized that Wikipedia gets about 75 million hits a day, English-speaking Wikipedia. That's a lot more than go on the Wellcome website. If they want people to read and interact with their content, it should be on Wikipedia rather than just keeping it on a website that not many people go on. Wikipedia has become super important, and Alice kind of taught this to me. I thought it was just, sometimes I use it when I'm cheating on the crossword, I'm not gonna lie, but that's what I thought it was. That's what I thought the limit was. But it's also used massively by journalists, so people who are booking experts to come on to television programs or radio shows or anything like that. Actually, when journalists are about to introduce a topic or talk about something for the first time, they don't have time to read the technical scientific paper. So instead they go to Wikipedia for that just kind of initial introduction and an injection of information. It impacts education, so particularly in the developing world where people don't have access to up-to-date textbooks, you can get offline access to pretty much all of Wikipedia, particularly medical Wikipedia, which is peer-reviewed instantly by a team of doctors. And they have these incredible tablets that give offline access to people in the developing world. But also in science, something that I found fascinating when I was kind of early in my days of learning about Wikipedia was how much it influences particularly interdisciplinary science. And of the talks that I've caught so far at this amazing conference, everyone's working on quite an interdisciplinary area. It's engineering that's intersectioning with biology, that's meeting geochemistry, that's meeting planetary science. And there was a fantastic study a couple of years ago by a professor at MIT who assigned their class niche areas of chemistry to write about for Wikipedia. So all of these different areas, emerging areas of chemistry that didn't have Wikipedia pages, and then tracked how often they came up in scientific literature for the next 5 years. And they found that they could assign 1 in 300 words from peer-reviewed science articles to them originating on these Wikipedia pages. So it's not just school education, it's also academic research. And recently it's become more important because it's not only powering when you interact with it directly, but it also informs Siri and Amazon Alexa and Google Home. So if you've ever asked a question to any of these home assistants, the place they go to for information is Wikipedia. Massively powerful in recent months because of coronavirus and Black Lives Matter, but we can talk more about that in a bit. So what's on Wikipedia really matters, and in general, we think what matters is on Wikipedia. And it kind of massively surprised me, depressed me, and angered me to find that not everything that matters is on Wikipedia. So of the stats that we can collect of biographies on English-speaking Wikipedia, about 18.5% of those are about women. When I started this project, it was about 17.9. So getting to 18.6 feels huge. If you're interested in getting any of the other stats from Wikipedia, there are some fantastic websites because Wikipedia is all transparent and open access. This one that I've put in at the top that I won't even try and pronounce what it says, but this has a really, really good collection of looking at different disciplines and different languages, different when people were put onto Wikipedia, when they were born, if you want to pull any data like that. But it's kind of horrifying to think that this website that informs so much of our lives is so incredibly biased. So I can get the data on the representation of women, fewer than 1 in 5 of the biographies. It's very hard to get the data on the representation of different ethnicities or whether people are LGBTQ+, because it might just not be there on their page. So I kind of decided I like a challenge and I want to change this. So since the beginning of 2018, I've been writing these pages every single day. And it's been this amazing journey of learning so many different areas of science and so many different fascinating stories. You know, I feel sometimes like, you know, when you learn about and you're actually listening to everyone's talks today and the journeys and the adventures you go on, all you want to do is read up on that. All you want to do is learn a little bit more about that. And this Wikipedia project has really given me this opportunity to learn so many different things. I mean, my parents both doctors, medical doctors. So often I have to ring them or speak to them when I'm putting together a page because I just don't understand anything about medicine. But it really gives you that great chance. As mentioned, I've written a lot. So I've just written my 1120th, which is just so cool. And I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to keep going until, well, maybe I won't get to 50%. That's very hard to do because there's over 1 million biographies, but I will keep going for the meantime. I'll tell you about one fantastic woman before talking to you briefly about social media, and then I promise I'll be quiet. This is Gladys West. She is kind of a hero of mine now, actually. I wrote her page in the early days of my project, so kind of, I think a couple of months into 2018. And Gladys West was born in the 1930s, so she's approaching 90, if not 90 already. And she studied maths in America at a time when not many women and not many African-American women went to college to study maths. Actually, this was before universities in the UK would grant women academic degrees. So this was before you could graduate from Cambridge if you're a woman in the UK. She then started working for the government, for the US government, and she actually did the early mathematical models for GPS. So all of the GPS that we now rely on today are initially done by Gladys West. And what was amazing about this page is because it's quite hard to find anything out about people who work for the government. I found all of these kind of secret reports that you can see on the right-hand side. I think my nice laser pointer has crashed just there. So I'm sorry for everyone for that silly red dot. But I could find all of these reports and everything was redacted, and it felt like I was actually writing the film Hidden Figures. So I was like, this is so cool. And since Gladys West's page has been up, so about 2 years now, she's been nominated twice for BBC Top 100 Women. So she's been put on the front page of the BBC, which means that the views on the Wikipedia page goes into the tens of thousands. And she's also been inducted into the US Air Force Hall of Fame. So now we have all of these amazing pictures because the US government give you Creative Commons licenses on pictures, which is just so cool. So big things are happening. She's also finished her PhD by distance learning at the age of 90. So Gladys West's story keeps keeps emerging and keeps growing. And I just love that. Just to show you a bit of the impact that these editathons can have, we did an all-day editathon for Shut Down STEM Day, which was kind of the strike for Black lives, but in academia. It was on the 10th of June in response to the unjust killing of George Floyd. And we had, you can see, you can pull all of these stats. If anyone's interested in running an editathon of their own, I'm happy to help out. But you can see we had, in the middle, we had 204 editors. They created about 60 pages, edited almost 500 pages. About 3 weeks afterwards, this was the statistics. You can see it on the right-hand side now. We had 4.81 million page views for the pages that people had created during this event. So you can have this phenomenal impact without leaving your office, your lab, wherever you feel comfortable, you do it. Your hotel room if you're at a conference. The most amazing part is that it costs absolutely no money. So it costs no money to edit a Wikipedia page. You can go in, you can teach young people how to edit. This was an editathon that I did a couple of years ago with students coming into the chemistry department at Imperial to learn. All you really need is that enthusiasm and that energy to fight for change, and it will happen. And that's something I think is really, I don't know, I just absolutely love it. I love this part of editing. Teaching new people how to edit is amazing. And translating out of English into other languages is also just absolutely sensational. So beyond Wikipedia, something that I've really fought for is better representation of people from underrepresented groups in awards and honors lists. I spent a little bit of my lockdown, one Sunday afternoon, I promise, just counting all of the different people who'd won physics, science, and chemistry prizes. Oh, that's my nice PowerPoint animation, extent of my skills. This was an analysis of people who'd won physics medals and prizes since the beginning of time from the Institute of Physics. I looked at the genders, so men, women, and non-binary winners, and I looked at the ethnicity of the different winners, and I went through and I manually counted and looked these people up. And you can kind of see the terrible situation that we're in. Women have won about 8% of the awards, men have won a huge number. But when we look at the representation of different ethnicities, particularly in these really senior top-level awards, it is absolutely shocking how undiverse this is. Sam also did a similar analysis and copied my way of presenting it because she's a legend, of geoscience prizes and medal winners. And you can catch this on her. She put it on Twitter. So that's her Twitter again, if you didn't catch it before. But it's kind of similar, you know, terrible representation of non-white people in prize winners and pretty awful representation of women. So something I've been really working towards over the past year is nominating people from more diverse backgrounds for big awards and honors. And I would encourage you, oh, flashing to remind me of Sam, I would encourage you to do the same. Look in your institutions, look at the AGU, the EGU, and the other professional bodies that you all represent, and start to really think about how we can better represent diverse people in those top levels of celebration, because that not only serves as a beacon and a role model and an inspiration. You know, when you see these incredible people win prizes, you think I could be like that too. But it also does something for them. It changes the way people feel connected and valued by their scientific community. And that's something that I think is really important. So a few last things. I'm just going to talk very briefly about social media, and then just a few different tiny, short, very I promise they're tiny, things that I wish I'd kind of thought about when I was doing my PhD. And then we can go to questions if there's time. So I think Twitter can be great. It can be really great and really useful for us as scientists, or it can be really bad and really depressing. And something I've been thinking about a lot lately is how we use it in a positive way. So things I think are incredible as an early career researcher using Twitter is it completely takes away the hierarchies that we are so familiar with in academia, you know, the professor, the lecturer, the technician, the postdoc, the PhD student, the master's student. All of those different things are completely abolished when you go to somewhere like Twitter. And you see these phenomenal accounts run by master's students or PhD students or something like that have tens of thousands more followers than really senior Nobel laureates. And I think that's kind of cool. I like that kind of anarchy in social media. It also gives you the opportunity to connect with people beyond your discipline. So people who are journal editors, or people who are working on a different kind of project, or maybe people who want to put on a science comedy show. It lets you have those interactions. So kind of huge things that I think are very valuable for you as a scientist. It lets you connect with a really big audience. Something I loved recently over the past couple of months has been how many teachers and A-level students I've been chatting to through Twitter about, you know, the debacle with exam results and other things like that. But it really shows you the diversity of people who follow you and listen. You can have these amazing discussions, and it's much different it's very different to Wikipedia, right? Because it's very two-way. It's very, you say something and people can respond, and you can choose whether you want to respond or not. I think particularly that the community that you're entering, the scientific community that you're entering, is really awesome. The earth sciences, the environment, the climate community on Twitter is really warm, welcoming, and encouraging. And I would say to all of you who don't have Twitter accounts to really think about it now, because it gives you a really great opportunity to scope out a lab. To scope out a lab before you join one as a postdoc. So I don't want to speak for too long now because I hate lists of words, as you can probably tell from my slides. So I might just send these all to you. But something I think is really important is when you start to get a platform to think about who and what you amplify. And obviously the world is going through some really big upheavals lately of looking at gender inequality, of looking at racial inequality. And I think that we should all take this opportunity on social media to sit back, to listen, to learn from people about their different experiences, and then to use that in a positive manner. And that's been something really crucial for me. There's been some perfect examples of this recently. I'm sure that you've all been following if you have, but after the awful incidents in Central Park of that black birder being accosted by a white woman, a group of young black scientists came together to put on Black Birders Week. And they had this amazing week where all black naturalists from around the world came together to share their stories on Twitter. This has inspired an incredible series of Black in Neuro Week, Black in Chem Week, Black in Engineering Week, where people have celebrated and shared their stories. And actually next week is Black in Geoscience Week. So helpfully, I've put the Twitter handle on the wrong slide, silly Jess. But you can see here on the left-hand side, it says Black in Geoscience, and this is their poster about what's going on. So I think get involved, take part in those kind of things, and really start to kind of tell and think about these stories. So I've promised you now that I'm on the last few slides, and I promise that's what I'm on. So I just wanted to run through really quickly things that I think are important, and then we'll go to questions. If you're having challenges, bold statement, Jess, if you're having challenges with your PI or the person leading your project, find someone new who can give you academic advice, find a mentor, find a postdoc, find someone you can turn to for information. I found it really hard towards the end of my PhD because my supervisor had very different ideas for what I should do next, and also my own ability. I think she underestimated me. So something that I think is really great is to find someone nearby who can help you out and to give you that advice. Don't be scared to switch disciplines for a postdoc. I kind of teetered on the edge of the work that I did during my master's and PhD was very much looking at solar cells and different things like that. Now I'm moving a little bit more into different devices. So moving into light emitting devices. And then my next project, my next position, which starts in October, is very much looking at spintronics. So very different. And I think that I was really terrified at the end of my PhD that I'd kind of lost that ability to learn, that I'm really good at one kind of spectroscopy, but I might not be able to be good at anything else. And actually having that opportunity to keep learning is what keeps you excited as a scientist. So don't be scared about that. Don't listen to the people who are still trying to train you for academia of 30 or 40 years ago. When I applied for a fellowship last summer. And when I applied, one person told me that everything that I'd done was fluff. And then another person told me that I'd have to fight very hard to be taken seriously as a scientist. And at the end of the day, I got the fellowship and it's really great. But I think that people are giving you advice based on a scientific situation, a scientific discipline, an entity that was decades old, and academia is changing, and we need to be the force and the power that changes that. Do you see that in people like Chris? And I guess coming off that, surround yourself with people who believe in the version of academia that you want to work with, your colleagues, the people who put together this conference, the way we're all fighting for change. And I guess Twitter has given me that opportunity to surround with people like that from all around the world. Man, it looks like I have a lot of bullet points on this slide, so I'm sorry. I promise this is it though. So look for fellowship opportunities early and look up people who've received those fellowships before and email them for advice. I've been amazed at how helpful and useful and kind people have been when I've reached out to say, can you help me write this proposal? Can you help me just check through this? Can you have a chance to help me and give me a bit of interview prep? Find people who've had them before, say, fantastic, you're amazing, well done on getting that. And then ask them how they got it and actually do that and keep applying for things. And keep applying for them, keep writing them down, save all of these different things. but recognize that they won't all come through, and that's okay. And I realize that I can put this slide up and act as if I'm okay when things don't come through, when really it breaks my little heart. So try and keep your spirits up, because everyone has these dips and these rises that we will get eventually. But keep applying for stuff, keep writing everything down, and back up everything. Save all your grant proposals, save every Beamline application that you put together, because when you've started doing that kind of thing, you can fall back on it later on to get information. I guess I should conclude by saying that you've got to remember that you're the most important part of the research project that you're doing, and that your mental health, your physical health, the things that make you you, the going out, the running, the swimming, the staying in, the watching Netflix, all of those different things are incredibly crucial to the success of your project. And we need to spend time investing in those and making sure that we keep ourselves as happy as we can be, because then we'll do the best scientific research. I think that I realized all of these kind of zany artistic skills that I'd acquired. I went to art school for a year before I did physics. And all of these different things that I'd learned there, for a long time, I was just trying to kind of silence them and not think about it and just focus on, you know, equations and learning ridiculous diagrams. And then I realized how useful all of these skills were for making papers that look really jazzy and making proposals that look really impactful and important. So find those things in you that are really crucial to who you are and make it something that's important for your research. And that, I think, is a good place to leave it. So if you want anything ever, you can send me an email at jessica.wade@imperial.ac.uk. I'm on Twitter a lot, too much maybe. These are two books that I recommend more than anything. So Angela's Inferior, The True Power of Women in the Science That Shows It, and her subsequent book, Superior, The Return of Race Science, which looks at academic racism and racial inequality around the world, actually, but how it started from the UK. I think that's probably enough. So thank you so much, and I'm sorry for overrunning, and yeah, everyone, you're all fantastic, and just keep shining. Thanks.